Welcome back, my sweet disenchanted heart. The candles lean toward you as if recognizing an old pilgrim. You have come seeking the truth inside the fairy glass, and I will give it softly like poison and honey. Tonight we unmake the pretty fables and let the older breaths beneath them stir again. Each began as a warning, a hunger, a bruise dressed in lace. Before we go on, I'd like to inform that I will release part 2 of this video with stories never heard of before when I get a 1,000 subscribers. Some of them would truly shock you. For now, close your eyes. The first book waits. Its cover bound in briar. They named her Talia, and the name fit her like sunlight fits a morning at first. In the beginning, the kingdom was a tidy clock, windows open to clean air and the chiming of hours. Servants moved like notes along a staff. The royal cradle was a pale boat sailing a bright sea of promises. The wise women came in a rustle of wool and thistle seed, each to touch the child's brow and lay a single thread upon her future. Grace, laughter, the nimble knack of song, the good fortune that turned stones into steps. But a door had been forgotten, and behind forgotten doors time keeps old things. From that door stepped a woman whose gift had always been truth, which no one asks for and everyone needs. Slighted, she spoke a sentence that tasted of iron. The spindle awaits you, little bloom. One prick, and you will fall beyond waking, and the house will learn how long a breath can last. Years passed, and the years were pretty. Talia grew as if warmed by a private sun. You know the way a child will chase a ribbon of light through dust, or turn her cheek to the nap of velvet merely to feel how tenderness can whisper. She was like that, curious as a flame, soft as what the flame burns. Every door was half a dare, every silence was a secret with its finger to its lips. And somewhere in the palace, tucked into a stair the maids stopped using, sat a small wheel. Its wooden spoke gleamed the way teeth gleam when they have fed on enough patience. When the prick came, it was not dramatic. The world did not cry out. The spindle kissed her fingertip, and the air around her shuddered as if remembering a debt. The music in the hall blinked. A moth paused on a curtain and forgot to be alive. They carried her through corridors still echoing their own footsteps into a long room where the windows were tall and stubborn with light. They laid her upon a bed that had always wanted to be a bier. Then they closed the door and began to learn the slow language of dust. Sleep is not a mercy when it is a prison. The court fainted by degrees. Tapestries sighed and surrendered their colors. Fruit abandoned itself upon platters, and ants founded tiny rustling kingdoms among the sugared figs. Even the mirrors went blind from staring at one face too long. Outside, the forest grew busy with conspiracies of green. Vines crept toward stone like rumors. Owls took ownership of stairwells. The seasons came like couriers and left like thieves. The house forgot its own voice. It was into this stopped world that a hunter arrived. Crown on his head by accident, cruelty in his blood by habit, the kind of man whose boots believe floors are meant to kneel. He smelled the strangeness before he saw it, the cool sweetness of long sleep, the faint metal tang of still time. Doors that had been shy of opening swung wide for him. Dust drifted like unspun silk in the path of his hands. Portraits leaned to watch him walk. He followed the hush to its source and found the bed. Talia's mouth held the pale curve of an unfinished breath. Her lashes were small black commas, saying not yet. He called to her as one calls to a deer that has already decided to be gone. He touched her wrist and discovered a pulse that lay quietly like a secret at the bottom of a well. The room waited, the house listened, because power mistakes stillness for consent. He laid claim to what was never offered. The walls learned a new kind of silence. Somewhere inside that sleep, awareness trembled like a fish under ice, alive and unable. Her body, still a chapel of breath and warmth, understood the wrongness. The mind, locked behind the thorn of the spell, could not lift a single syllable to save her. He brutally took what was not his for the taking and robbed a sleeping girl of her innocence. She was alive, and there is a special horror in being alive when you cannot answer a hand you have not invited. The king left unrepentant, leaving behind a ruin scented with roses and violation, and did not bother looking back. Months passed. The house resumed the ritual of listening to itself. In the enchanted hush, her body quickened, deep as tide, old as moon. A secret arithmetic began to show its work. Twin lives stirred, small and separate suns turning within the darkness, naming themselves sun and moon. Long before language could hold them, the room thickened with milk and destiny. If you had stood there with your hand outstretched, you might have felt the faintest brush of a future moving across your skin. One dawn, while the tapestries studied the floor and the dust practiced falling, an infant's rooting mouth found what no physician could. It searched like a seeker through a forest of pale fingers and drew from the pad of one the buried thorn of flax. The world exhaled, the hush released its fist. Talia's eyes opened into a light that seemed to startle at being seen. She woke to two children reaching, blinking as if they had invented sight. They were impossibly whole. The air tasted of warm linen and first cries. She had slept without dreaming and woken crowned with motherhood. Confusion rose in her like a tide that had forgotten which moon to obey. Yet when sun sighed against her breast, and moon curled her damp hand around Talia's thumb, understanding flowed in. Love does not ask for the origin of anything. It chooses to keep elsewhere. The king went on with his kingdom, and the kingdom, as kingdoms do, agreed to forget what would be inconvenient to remember. But pleasure, like hunger, has a memory. He missed the motionless sweetness, the obedient quiet that never argued, and he found his way back to the woods as a thief returns to the window that once stuck on its latch. He climbed the stairs he did not deserve and opened the door upon a vision he had not rehearsed. Not a motionless damsel, not a porcelain sleep, a woman awake with her hair unloosed and her gown fallen open at the shoulder, where a child pressed its cheek. The other infant lay in the crook of her arm, hiccuping victory into the air. Milk shone at the corner of the little mouth. The room smelled of skin and linen and the relief that follows danger. The king stood framed by the doorway as if the house itself had judged him and decided to make a portrait of his surprise. He said the word love the way a man says mine. He stepped forward with the easy forgiveness of someone who has not asked himself a single difficult question. He thought fate had returned his lost thing in improved condition. He thought destiny and blessing and right. He did not think reckoning. The world, however, did. News travels in patterns strangers cannot see. The queen, his queen, had a mind like blue steel and a heart trained to make arithmetic of anything that blinked. When she learned there were two children with eyes like bits of the king's weather, a woman who had been a rumor and was now a fact, she moved with the slow grace of catastrophe in a silk dress. Orders fell from her mouth like coins into a coffer. The children to the kitchen to its boiling, the mother to a pyre that would explain everything. In cellars, where onions wept and knives spoke fluent metal, a cook who had fed soldiers and beggars and once a prince on the day he lost his crown, looked down at two small faces and felt the old ladder of his spine turn to water. He wrapped sun and moon in cloth too fine for their station and hid them in a place where steam would keep their secret. Then he lifted a lamb, gentle even in death, and let it stand for what the queen had demanded. The pot sang its grim lullaby. When the king came, the queen quickly ordered the dishes to be served up, and the king fell to eating with great delight, exclaiming, "By the life of me, how good this is! Oh, how excellent, by the soul of my grandfather!" And the queen all the while kept saying, "Eat away, for you eat what is your own." At first the king paid no attention to what she said and kept eating. Meanwhile the queen, not satisfied with what she had done, called the secretary again and sent him to fetch Talia, pretending that the king wished to see her. At this summons Talia went, that very instant, longing to see the light of her eyes and not knowing that only the smoke awaited her. But when she came before the queen, the latter said to her, with the face of a Nero and full of poison, as a viper, "Welcome, madam. Are you indeed the pretty mischief maker? Are you the weed that has caught my husband's eye and given me all this trouble? So you are come at last to purgatory, where I'll make you pay for all the ill you have done me." Talia tried to run, but she was dragged through corridors that remembered her cradle and would now witness her demise. Poor Talia, seeing matters come to a bad pass, fell on her knees before the queen and besought her at least to grant her time to take the clothes from off her back. Whereupon the queen, not so much out of pity for the unhappy girl as to get possession of her dress, which was embroidered all over with gold and pearls, said to her, "Undress yourself, I allow you." Then Talia began to undress, and as she took off each garment she uttered an exclamation of grief. And when she had stripped off her cloak, her gown and her jacket, and was proceeding to take off her petticoat, they seized her and were dragging her away. Servants watched with their hands as still as gilt. Between one stare and the next, the house seemed to lean just slightly toward her, as if unable to stand entirely upright, while such a thing was being attempted under its roof. They bound her to the post with rope that had once tied bundles of wheat. Fire has the patience of saints and the appetite of gods. It licked the kindling and began to believe it would get everything it wanted. At that moment the king came up, and seeing the spectacle be demanded to know the whole truth. And when he asked for the children and heard that his wife had ordered them to be killed, in revenge for his unfaithfulness, the unhappy king gave himself up to despair, exclaiming, "Alas then, I have myself been the wolf to my little lambs. Woe is me! Why did not my veins recognize that they were the fountain of their blood?" He turned, saw the queen's gaze burning steadier than the flames could hope to, and gave her to the sentence she had written. The court arranged its face into the shape of justice. Bells rehearsed the note they ring when they feel useful. People said the words people say when they are relieved that wickedness for once wore a crown, and was therefore easy to identify. So saying, he ordered her to be thrown into the same fire which had been lighted for Talia, and the secretary with her, who was the handle of this cruel game, and the weaver of this wicked web. Then he was going to do the same with the cook, thinking that Lai had killed the children. But the cook threw himself at the king's feet and said, "Truly, Sir King, I would desire no other sinecure in return for the service I have done you than to be thrown into a furnace full of live coal. I would ask no other gratuity than the thrust of a spike. I would wish for no other amusement than to be roasted in the fire. I would desire no other privilege than to have the ashes of a cook mingled with those of a queen. But I look for no such great reward for having saved your children and brought them back to you in spite of that wicked creature who wished to kill them. Would you like the neat ending? Many do. It goes like this. The man who first trespassed is permitted to call himself husband. The woman who first suffered is instructed to call herself happy. The children are blessed by those who nearly ate them. A wedding robe is ironed over an old bruise. The kingdom, ever obedient, applauds on cue. The tale prints itself on clean paper and is passed to children who smell of soap and wonder, because wonder likes stories where the knife returns to its drawer. I will not forbid you that ending. Sleep needs softness, but the old story has other rooms. In one, the hall where the spindle waits is locked with stronger locks, and a girl walks past it for the rest of her life, knowing exactly what waits there and why it wanted her. In another, the queen's ghost leans against a cold kitchen wall and mutters her defense to Potts, who never answer. If I could not own his heart, I would at least own the explanation of it. In another still, the king stands at the threshold where he first taught the room to be silent and cannot step inside. He is a man outdoors in his own house, and there is a room where Talia, years later, sits beside a window and watches rain tidy the world. Sun and moon are discovering the complicated shapes of laughter. She has learned the quiet arithmetic of attention, how to count what is here and not go mad from what is missing. When she shuts her eyes, she sometimes feels the spindle pricking again, small and unforgivable. When she opens them, she sees the two faces that rewrote her ending without asking permission from the first page. Let me tell you, before the candles gutter, how the tale changes its clothes when it must step out to court. Court poets, anxious to please, stitched a softer dress for it, swapped the man's trespass for a kiss, gave the sleep a length that could be counted, turned the queen into something monstrous so that the crime would live elsewhere. Later, singers with painted light and obedient orchestras taught an entire world to hum while it watched a girl, renamed and made safe, find her way to morning, as if mornings were always benevolent. The film ends where nothing that truly happened is obliged to begin. But I was there when the room held its breath and learned what a body can be made to hold without moving. I was there when a baby's mouth solved what a palace full of counsel could not. If you listen, you can hear the difference between romance and one makes a picture of the bed after the sheets are changed. The other remembers the nail in the frame and the weight it had to bear. The thorns around a sleeping house do not merely protect it, they confess it. Hush again, my little fractured wish. We step into a forest where winter rehearses its lines, and every tree wears the expression of someone who has seen too much. The snow is not innocence here. It is a sheet pulled over a scene. They called her Snow White to make a poem of her skin like frost, lips like a cut pomegranate, hair the color of sleep when it refuses to be kind. Before she could count her freckles, the world gave her a crown she did not ask to carry. Fairest. The crown was made of attention, and attention in kingdoms with too many mirrors is dangerous metal. In a high room polished to the edge of cruelty stood a queen who had taught her own reflection to kneel. She fed it questions the way wolves are fed raw meat. For a time the mirror obeyed and told her she was the first bright thing in any room. Then one morning, when the light came in thin and honest, it named another. Snow White grew up and became ever more beautiful. When she was 7 years old, she was as beautiful as the light of day, even more beautiful than the queen herself. The queen held the truth for a long breath and found it too heavy to keep. Then she summoned a huntsman. His boots were wet with the kinds of errands men say yes to, because kings and queens have the power to define necessary. The queen said to him, "Take Snow White out into the woods. I never want to see her again. Kill her, and as proof that she is dead, bring her lungs and her liver back to me." The huntsman obeyed and took Snow White into the woods. She looked back only once, the way a swallow glances at the roof it will not see again. He took out his hunting knife and was about to stab it into her innocent heart when she began to cry, saying, "Oh dear huntsman, let me live. I will run into the wild woods and never come back." Because she was so beautiful, the huntsman took pity on her, and he said, "Run away, you poor child. Run," as if the word were a rope he could throw across the river between life and death. He thought, the wild animals will soon devour you anyway. But still it was as if a stone had fallen from his heart, for he would not have to kill her. Just then a young boar came running by. He killed it, cut out its lungs and liver, and took them back to the queen as proof of Snow White's death. The cook had to boil them with salt, and the wicked woman ate them, supposing that she had eaten Snow White's lungs and liver, her own child. Yes, the queen was Snow White's actual mother. Snow ran until the trees softened their posture, until the cold let her breath walk beside her instead of chasing her heels. She found a small house with a low door that made everyone who entered practice bowing. Inside, the furniture was arranged like a chorus of small witnesses. 7 beds like 7 breaths, 7 plates like 7 patient questions. She set her fear down between the plates and waited. Because she was so hungry and thirsty, Snow White ate a few vegetables and a little bread from each little plate, and from each mug she drank a drop of wine. Afterward, because she was so tired, she lay down on a bed, but none of them felt right. One was too long, the other too short, until finally the 7th one was just right. She remained lying in it, entrusted herself to God, and fell asleep. After dark, the masters of the house returned home. They were the 7 dwarfs. Their hands smelled of mineral and echo. Their pockets were lined with the dust of old mountains. They lit their 7 candles, and as soon as it was light in their house, they saw that someone had been there, for not everything was in the same order as they had left it. They were kind the way men become kind when no one has asked them to be. They saw her and felt the echo of a tenderness their work had misplaced. She told them that her stepmother had tried to kill her, that the huntsman had spared her life, and that she had run the entire day, finally coming to their house. The dwarfs said, "If you will keep house for us and cook, make beds, wash, sew, and knit, and keep everything clean and orderly, then you can stay with us, and you shall have everything that you want." "Yes," said Snow White, "with all my heart." So she kept house for them. Every morning they went into the mountains looking for ore and gold, and in the evening when they came back home their meal had to be ready. During the day the girl was alone. For a while the world made a small circle around her and called it safe. The good dwarfs warned her, saying, "Be careful about your stepmother. She will soon know that you are here. Do not let anyone in. Envy, my dears, is a hunter with a perfect sense of direction. It can follow a girl across miles of branch and down a stair none of the living admit to using." Now the queen, believing that she had eaten Snow White's lungs and liver, could only think that she was again the first and the most beautiful woman of all. She stepped before her mirror and said, "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who in this land is fairest of all?" It answered, "You, my queen, are fair, it is true, but Snow White, beyond the mountains with the 7 dwarfs, is still 1,000 times fairer than you." This startled the queen, for she knew that the mirror did not lie, and she realized that the huntsman had deceived her and that Snow White was still alive. Then she thought, and thought again, how she could kill Snow White, for as long as she was not the most beautiful woman in the entire land, her envy would give her no rest. The queen dressed herself in the paper-thin manners of strangers, and knocked 3 times on 3 different days, each knock a different blade. The first gift was a lace too pretty to be trusted. She laced it around Snow's waist with the precision of a new. Beauty has always liked to watch girls hold their breath, when Snow's lips went the color of old violets. The queen smiled like a surgeon who hears a heartbeat stop at the right moment. The dwarfs found her soon enough, cut the ribbon that kindness had not dared to question, and the room took its breath again. The second gift was a comb with fine teeth and worse intentions. She slid it into Snow's hair as if crowning her, then pressed down until the scalp sang a note only poison knows. Snow folded like a letter. The dwarfs plucked the comb free, and the girl's eyes rose from the dark like two moons deciding to be full again. The third gift was the lesson the world repeats because it never tires of teaching it. An apple divided between promise and trap. One side harmless, one side not. The queen, whose mouth had learned to tell the truth about the wrong things, bit first from safety, then offered temptation with a mother's smile. Snow took it. The bite was a door closing with a quiet click. She fell beautifully, because beauty demands even its dying to be photographable. We speak of glass coffins as if they were romantic. They are not. They are a technology for grief that cannot bear to be parted from its subject. The dwarfs, who had become a kind of chorus to her life, made one so the forest could see what loss looks like when it refuses to cover itself. Birds came and wrote their signatures along the edges with the ink of their beaks. The seasons stopped by with gifts the dead can't use. Time is a wheel that sometimes crushes, sometimes carries. Now it came to pass that a prince entered these woods and happened onto the dwarf's house, where he sought shelter for the night. He saw the coffin on the mountain with beautiful Snow White in it, and he read what was written on it with golden letters. He wanted the coffin the way collectors want impossible butterflies, still perfect and his. Then he said to the dwarfs, "Let me have the coffin, I will give you anything you want for it." But the dwarfs answered, "We will not sell it for all the gold in the world." Then he said, "Then give it to me, for I cannot live without being able to see Snow White. I will honor her and respect her as my most cherished one." As he thus spoke, the good dwarfs felt pity for him and gave him the coffin. The prince had his servants carry it away on their shoulder. But then it happened that fate, which loves clumsiness, caught one man by the foot. One of them stumbled on some brush, and this dislodged from Snow White's throat the piece of poisoned apple that she had bitten on. Not long afterwards, Snow's breath returned as if someone had remembered a password. She opened her eyes, lifted the lid from her coffin, sat up, and was alive again. What comes next depends on who is telling the tale and what they would like forgiven. Some say she turned her face toward the prince and saw a future shaped like a song. Some say she looked past him to the men who had kept watch and understood that gratitude could be a country to live in. All versions agree that there was a wedding, and the queen, poor architect of her own doom, dressed herself in dignity and attended, because hatred likes to be present when its projects fail, if only to take notes. Snow White's godless mother was also invited to the feast. After putting on her beautiful clothes, she stepped before her mirror and said, "Mirror, mirror, on the wall, who in this land is fairest of all?" The mirror answered, "You, my queen, are fair. It is true, but the young queen is 1,000 times fairer than you." The wicked woman uttered a curse, and she became so frightened that she did not know what to do. At first she did not want to go to the wedding, but she found no peace. She had to go and see the young queen. When she arrived, she recognized Snow White, and terrorized, she could only stand there without moving. The ballroom was warm as a throat. The hearth had been instructed in a cruel craft. Iron shoes, heated until they remembered what stars feel like. They were brought forth with tongs and placed before her. The queen was invited to dance, and courtesy forces one to accept. She danced with the care of someone translating pain into choreography. And when she fell, it was not because evil always loses, but because some bodies finish their arguments sooner than others. Later retellings clean the table with hurried hand. They swap child for maiden, mother for stepmother, liver and lungs for a neatly Valentine-shaped heart. They teach the prince to kiss because kissing photographs well. They throw the queen from a cliff so no one has to learn the physics of punishment across a floor. But the older forest keeps the first ending in a hollow log, and sometimes on cold nights, it takes it out and reads it aloud to the owls. In that ending, envy is not a dragon slain by light. It is a small persistent blade that cuts until it runs out of hand to wield it. In that ending, kindness is 7 pairs of hands that lift and wash and mend without speeches. In that ending, resurrection is not romance. It is an accident with good timing and honest gravity. After the crowds went home and the musicians counted their coins, Snow walked once more beneath the trees. She touched the bark the way you touch a friend who never betrayed you. The dwarfs returned to the good work of bringing stone to its knee. The prince tried to learn the names of the birds, which is as noble a thing as any man can do after he has mistaken ownership for devotion. The mirrors somewhere in the castle refused to answer questions for a while, as if fast, and the queen's shoes cooled to iron again. And the iron remembered it had been earth once, and the earth remembered everything. Come nearer, my ember-hearted wanderer. The night has a hearth of its own, and it burns with the memories of those who fed it. There was once a manor whose windows had learned to squint, as if the past glared too brightly to fade. In its kitchen, the stones were seasoned with spilled soup and old jokes. In its upper rooms, polished floors reflected the faces of those who believed themselves too precious to be contained by a mirror. Between the two, between soot and silk, lived a girl everyone called by the name of her condition, Cinderella. Not because her mother had chosen it, but because ash clings to what it loves. When she felt that her end was drawing near, she called her only daughter to her bedside and said, "Dear child, remain pious and good, and then our dear God will always protect you, and I will look down on you from heaven and be near you." With this, she closed her eyes and died. Her father had once walked the halls with the contentment of a man whose fields listened to him. Then his coffers had taken up the habit of echoing. The woman he married after grief put her hands in his hair, brought with her 2 daughters whose mouths smiled like polished knives. They pulled the house tight around themselves, like a cloak sewn from other people's hours. They needed someone to hold it closed. Cinderella, with her gentle back and soft-spoken wrists, was chosen. They took her beautiful clothes away from her, dressed her in an old gray smock, and gave her wooden shoes. By day, she tended rooms that pretended not to see her. She learned the geography of stains and the secret places where the floorboards hid splinters for meaner days. She slept by the hearth, where smoke had once been called prayer, and she fed the fire with the careful thrift of those who have learned to treat warmth as an animal, to be coaxed, not commanded. At night, when the others slept under heavy quilts of entitlement, she slipped out to a small hill where a willow kept watch over a grave. The willow's hair brushed her face like a mother who refuses to let death end the habit of blessing. One day it happened that the father was going to the fair, and he asked his 2 stepdaughters what he should bring back for them. "Beautiful dresses," said the one. "Pearls and jewels," said the other. "And you, Cinderella," he said, "what do you want?" "Father, break off for me the first twig that brushes against your hat on your way home." So he bought beautiful dresses, pearls, and jewels for his 2 stepdaughters. On his way home, as he was riding through a green thicket, a hazel twig brushed against him and knocked off his hat. Then he broke off the twig and took it with him. Arriving home, He gave his stepdaughters the things that they had asked for, and he gave Cinderella the twig from the hazel bush. Cinderella thanked him, went to her mother's grave, and planted the branch on it, and she wept so much that her tears fell upon it and watered it. It grew and became a beautiful tree. Cinderella went to this tree 3 times every day, and beneath it she wept and prayed. Sorrow that startles the birds is sorrow that loses track of itself, but steadily, until the roots knew her name. A white bird came to the tree every time, and whenever she expressed a wish, the bird would throw down to her what she had wished for. The house above preferred spectacle. The stepmother's voice contained a harpsichord of disapproval. The sisters practiced laughter as if it were a dance that required sharp shoes. Gossip came across the fields like pollen. A royal decree. 3 nights of feasting. A chance for the prince to weigh the kingdom's daughters on the scale of his gaze. The stepmother's rooms became a workshop for desperation. Fabrics flounced, jewels rehearsed their glinting. Voices learned new ways to say I deserve. Cinderella was told she might watch from the kitchen door if the dishes could be taught to wash themselves. She finished the work and more besides. She brushed the soot from her face and turned her eyes to the hill. Beneath the willow, the earth hummed the tune grief sings when it agrees to be a bridge instead of a wall. I am wearing nothing but hope, she whispered to the branches, and hope is a thin dress. The tree trembled, and the tremble became wings. A white bird, the color of forgiveness, descended, and from the leaves drifted a gown. The way dawn drifts over a field, without apology. It was not spun of vanity. It was made of the threads of all the small kindnesses she had performed when no one watched. Shoes of gold glinted at the root, as if the earth itself had decided she deserved to be carried for once. The first night, the ballroom was a jar full of bees. Noise, scent, sweetness. A hazard to those who forgot to respect it. She entered like a question a room didn't know it had been waiting to be asked. Everything looked at her, the way mirrors look at miracles. The prince, who had learned from boyhood that wanting and having are twins, stepped into her orbit as if obeying gravity's older sister. They danced. And the dance was less a set of steps than a conversation between bodies that had read similar books. When the clock remembered its job, she left without letting the word please form on anyone's mouth. The second night, the gown the tree gave her was made of moonlight taught to obey seams. The prince tried to learn her name, but names can be cages, and she had only just learned the trick of walking without one. Again they danced. Again she vanished before midnight, grew hungry. The third night, the dress carried the history of every star that has ever agreed to be seen. Even the stepmother's eyes, which usually closed to anything that did not threaten her, had to open a little. But magic keeps a ledge. At the bottom of a stair, a trick waited. The prince had ordered the steps brushed with pitch, that clinging black truth the kitchen knew well. When she fled, one golden slipper bowed to its duty and remained. The prince picked it up with the expression of a man reading a prophecy that flatters him. He took the shoe across the kingdom because a story insists on proving itself with ceremony. The stepmother saw opportunity dressed as destiny. She sat her daughters down and spoke in a whisper that crawled. Small sacrifices for large crowns. The first girl sliced away a toe, and pain tried to keep the secret but failed. Blood, that stubborn memoirist, wrote its version across the leather. The second carved off a heel. The shoe swallowed the lie for a moment, then sickened. Doves on the windowsill. Cinderella's old friends who had watched her teach crumbs the manners of generosity sang out their verdict. Rook de goût, Rook de goo. There's blood in the shoe. The shoe is too tight. This bride is not right. Their voices were needles sewing honesty into the air. At last, the prince reached the house, where Ash slept like a faithful dog. The stepmother arranged her face into hospitality, that counterfeit coin. Cinderella, hands wet from the sink, stood by the door the way patience stands by every door. The prince noticed her the way one notices a window in a room you believed had none. Let the girl try, said the father, and his voice carried a regret older than money. The shoe slid on as if it had been waiting at the end of a long road for its own foot to come home. Weddings are theater. This one played to a full house. The doves who had kept the minutes of kindness accurately attended. The sisters who mistook spectacle for salvation came in dresses that clung like apology. When the new bride walked, the doves descended in a blur not of malice, but of mathematics, to even the old equation. The older sister walked on their right side and the younger on their left side, and the pigeons pecked out one eye from each of them. Afterwards, as they came out of the church, the older one was on the left side and the younger one on the right side, and then the pigeons pecked out the other eye from each of them, and thus for their wickedness and falsehood they were punished with blindness as long as they lived. The world briefly balanced. Later retellings bring a different ledger, a benevolent wand, a pumpkin's sudden ambition, sewing mice who whistle while they redeem a girl. The white bird in the willow is transformed into an old woman with excellent timing. The three knights become one. The blood is cleaned from the shoe with a cloth named Mercy. That rendition is a lullaby, and you may sleep to it. I will not shake you awake. But if you listen under the melody, there is the creak of a tree that bends because a girl watered it with tears. There is the soft arithmetic of doves counting debts. There is the truth that some slippers gleam because someone has polished them with the rag of her own day. After the noise, the house changed. Not entirely. Buildings have loyalties to their first stories, but Ash no longer felt required. It wandered freely, settled where it pleased, learned to be decorative instead of defining. Cinderella moved through rooms that had once turned their faces from her, taught them to look without taking. In the kitchen, she thanked the pots for surviving. On the hill, beneath the willow, she brought bread for the birds and told the grave what had happened. I am seen now, not for my hands alone, but for the way I carried myself when no one looked. As for the prince, he learned the names of common herbs and the use of quiet. Power that does not learn becomes a rumor food eats. He sat with the doves while they shook their wings, and when he asked for a story, they told him about blood and shoes, and he listened as if he were about to step somewhere dangerous in the dark. The kingdom slept easier, not because evil had been destroyed, it never is, but because one house had remembered how to be a home. And somewhere in the willow, a white bird settled with the soft sound of a page turning, ready for the next girl who would need a dress made from her own goodness. Now leave the hearth, my tide-dreaming listener, and follow me down a staircase of water. The sea keeps its own library, shelves of pressure, aisle lamps of plankton light, the soft hush of silt settling like dust on old stories. Here between whale song and the iron sleep of anchors lived a girl whose voice could have persuaded winter to change its mind. The Sea King had been a widower for many years, and his aged mother kept house for him. She was a very wise woman, and exceedingly proud of her high birth. On that account she wore 12 oysters on her tail, while others also of high rank were only allowed to wear. She was, however, deserving of very great praise, especially for her care of the little sea princesses, her granddaughters. They were 6 beautiful children, but the youngest was the prettiest of them all. Her skin was as clear and delicate as a rose leaf, and her eyes as blue as the deepest sea, but, like all the others, She had no feet and her body ended in a fish's tail. She was the youngest daughter, and that is already a warning. The youngest hears the last of the rules and all of the longing. Her sisters had collected the world's surface the way others collect jewels. A broken mast, a ring that once thought itself eternal, a little box with a mirror that showed a face older than the ocean. But she collected horizon. Nothing gave her so much pleasure as to hear about the world above the sea. She made her old grandmother tell her all she knew of the ships and of the towns, the people and the animal. To her it seemed most wonderful and beautiful to hear that the flowers of the land should have fragrance, and not those below the sea, that the trees of the forest should be green, and that the fishes among the trees could sing so sweetly that it was quite a pleasure to hear them. Her grandmother called the little birds fishes, or she would not have understood her, for she had never seen birds. When you have reached your 15th year, said the grandmother, you will have permission to rise up out of the sea, to sit on the rocks in the moonlight while the great ships are sailing by, and then you will see both forests and towns. At 15, which is the ocean's way of saying almost, she rose into the first dawn she could claim as hers. Ships do not look like miracles from the deck. From below they do. Their bellies are cathedrals of shadow and promise. Above, a storm practiced its letters across the sky, and the ship, reading too slowly, tore. Men fell like seeds thrown by a careless god. She moved with the physics of mercy and caught one whose face was arranged as if it had been sculpted to be a future. She pressed his mouth to the air and gave him its habit back. She laid him on sand and sang with her eyes until the tide agreed to be kind. The sun rose up red and glowing from the water, and its beams brought back the hue of health to the prince's cheeks, but his eyes remained closed. The mermaid kissed his high, smooth forehead and stroked back his wet hair. He seemed to her like the marble statue in her little garden, and she kissed him again and wished that he might live. He woke to other footsteps and a different voice, thanking a different heaven. She slipped back beneath the surf, realizing the first rule of wonder: it is shy, it does not take credit. In the palace below, light stitched itself into walls of coral. Seagrass played the part of curtains not needing to be drawn, but longing had moved in and would not respect the house's quiet. The girl's voice, once a lantern for every corridor, began to carry a bruise. There was so much that she wished to know, and her sisters were unable to answer all her questions. Then she applied to her old grandmother, who knew all about the upper world, which she very rightly called the lands above the sea. If human beings are not drowned, asked the Little Mermaid, can they live forever? Do they never die as we do here in the sea? Yes, replied the old lady. They must also die, and their term of life is even shorter than ours. We sometimes live to 300 years, but when we cease to exist here, we only become the foam on the surface of the water, and we have not even a grave down here of those we love. We have not immortal souls. We shall never live again, but like the green seaweed, when once it has been cut off, we can never flourish more. Human beings, on the contrary, have a soul which lives forever, lives after the body has been turned to dust. It rises up through the clear, pure air, beyond the glittering stars. As we rise out of the water and behold all the land of the earth, so do they rise to unknown and glorious regions which we shall never see. Why have not we an immortal soul? Asked the Little Mermaid mournfully. I would give gladly all the hundreds of years that I have to live, to be a human being only for one day, and to have the hope of knowing the happiness of that glorious world above the stars. You must not think of that, said the old woman. We feel ourselves to be much happier and much better off than human beings. So I shall die, said the Little Mermaid, and as the foam of the sea I shall be driven about. never again to hear the music of the waves, or to see the pretty flowers, nor the red sun. Is there anything I can do to win an immortal soul? No, said the old woman, unless a man were to love you so much that you were more to him than his father or mother, and if all his thoughts and all his love were fixed upon you, and the priest placed his right hand in yours, and he promised to be true to you here and hereafter, then his soul would glide into your body and you would obtain a share in the future happiness of mankind. He would give a soul to you and retain his own as well. But this can never happen. Your fish's tail, which amongst us is considered so beautiful, is thought on earth to be quite ugly. They do not know any better, and they think it necessary to have two stout props, which they call legs, in order to be handsome. Then the little mermaid sighed and looked sorrowfully at her fish's tail. Let us be happy, said the old lady, and dart and spring about during the 300 years that we have to live, which is really quite long enough. After that we can rest ourselves all the better. This evening we are going to have a court ball. She asked the most dangerous question. What must I give to become what I am not? The answer, as it always is in efficient kingdoms, was everything you are. The sea witch lived where ropes forgotten by sailors learned to think they were vines. She did not deceive, she counted. Her home smelled of bargains drying on racks. She greeted the girl like a clerk greets a customer who knows the price and wants to pay it anyway. I know what you want, said the sea witch. It is very stupid of you, but you shall have your way, and it will bring you to sorrow, my pretty princess. You want to get rid of your fish's tail and to have two supports instead of it, like human beings on earth, so that the young prince may fall in love with you and that you may have an immortal soul. And then the witch laughed so loud and disgustingly that the toad and the snakes fell to the ground and lay there wriggling about. You are but just in time, said the witch, for after sunrise tomorrow I should not be able to help you till the end of another year. I will prepare a draught for you with which you must swim to land tomorrow before sunrise, and sit down on the shore and drink it. Your tail will then disappear and shrink up into what mankind calls legs, and you will feel great pain, as if a sword were passing through you. But all who see you will say that you are the prettiest little human being they ever saw. You will still have the same floating gracefulness of movement, and no dancer will ever tread so lightly, but at every step you take it will feel as if you were tread upon sharp knives, and that the blood must flow. If you will bear all this, I will help you. Yes, I will, said the little princess in a trembling voice, as she thought of the prince and the immortal soul. But think again, said the witch, for when once your shape has become like a human being, you can no more be a mermaid. You will never return through the water to your sisters or to your father's palace again. And if you do not win the love of the prince so that he is willing to forget his father and mother for your sake and to love you with his whole soul, and allow the priest to join your hands that you may be man and wife, then you will never have an immortal soul. The first morning after he marries another your heart will break, and you will become foam on the crest of the waves. I will do it, said the little mermaid, and she became pale as death. But I must be paid also, said the witch, and it is not a trifle that I ask. You have the sweetest voice of any who dwell here in the depths of the sea, and you believe that you will be able to charm the prince with it also. But this voice you must give to me. The best thing you possess will I have for the price of my draught. My own blood must be mixed with it, that it may be as sharp as a two-edged sword. But if you take away my voice, said the little mermaid, what is left for me? Your beautiful form, your graceful walk, and your expressive eyes. Surely with these you can enchain a man's heart. Well, have you lost your courage? Put out your little tongue that I may cut it off as my payment. Then you shall have the powerful draught. It shall be, said the little mermaid. Then the witch placed her cauldron on the fire to prepare the magic draught. Cleanliness is a good thing, said she, scouring the vessel with snakes. which she had tied together in a large knot. Then she pricked herself in the breast and let the black blood drop into it. The steam that rose formed itself into such horrible shapes that no one could look at them without fear. Every moment the witch threw something else into the vessel, and when it began to boil, the sound was like the weeping of a crocodile. When at last the magic draught was ready, it looked like the clearest water. The girl nodded with the courage of those who mistake endurance for inevitability. She drank the potion. It ran through her like a decision no one else approved. Pain braided itself into her bones and learned to walk there. When she stood on edges. Every step wrote a red letter only she could read. On land, air had too many adjectives. The prince, whose life had been saved by a story he misremembered, saw a girl who moved like music that had been injured, and thought it charming. He offered kindness the way fountains offer coins. Habitually, she smiled and made a cathedral of silence in which he felt briefly devout. At night she danced, and the dance was a beautiful lie told with honest suffering. He called her little one dear friend, names that rearranged desire into something domestic. When he spoke of love, it was the kind that placed a gentle hand on the head and walked away whistling. Very soon it was said that the prince must marry, and that the beautiful daughter of a neighboring king would be his wife, for a fine ship was being fitted out. Although the prince gave out that he merely intended to pay a visit to the king, it was generally supposed that he really went to see his daughter. A great company were to go with him. The little mermaid smiled and shook her head. She knew the prince's thoughts better than any of the others. I must travel, he had said to her. I must see this beautiful princess. My parents desire it, but they will not oblige me to bring her home as my bride. I cannot love her. She is not like the beautiful maiden in the temple, whom you resemble. If I were forced to choose a bride, I would rather choose you, my dumb foundling, with those expressive eyes. And then he kissed her rosy mouth, played with her long waving hair, and laid his head on her heart, while she dreamed of human happiness and an immortal soul. You are not afraid of the sea, my dumb child, said he, as they stood on the deck of the noble ship which was to carry them to the country of the neighboring king. And then he told her of storm and of calm, of strange fishes in the deep beneath them, and of what the divers had seen there, and she smiled at his descriptions, for she knew better than anyone what wonders were at the bottom of the sea. The ship sailed into the harbor of a beautiful town belonging to the king whom the prince was going to visit. The church bells were ringing, and from the high towers sounded a flourish of trumpets, and soldiers, with flying colors and glittering bayonets, lined the rocks through which they passed. Every day was a festival. Balls and entertainments followed one another, but the princess had not yet appeared. People said that she was being brought up and educated in a religious house, where she was learning every royal virtue. At last she came. Then the little mermaid, who was very anxious to see whether she was really beautiful, was obliged to acknowledge that she had never seen a more perfect vision of beauty. Her skin was delicately fair, and beneath her long dark eyelashes her laughing blue eyes shone with truth and purity. It was you, said the prince, who saved my life when I lay dead on the beach, and he folded his blushing bride in his arms. Oh, I am too happy, said he to the little mermaid. My fondest hopes are all fulfilled. You will rejoice at my happiness, for your devotion to me is great and sincere. The little mermaid kissed his hand, and felt as if her heart were already broken. On the same evening the bride and bridegroom went on board ship. Cannons were roaring, flags waving, and in the center of the ship a costly tent of purple and gold had been erected. It contained elegant couches for the reception of the bridal pair during the night. The ship, with swelling sails and a favorable wind, glided away smoothly and lightly over the calm sea. When it grew dark, a number of colored lamps were lit, and the sailors danced merrily on the deck. The little mermaid could not help thinking of her first rising out of the sea, when she had seen similar festivities and joys, and she joined in the dance, poised herself in the air as a swallow, when he pursues his prey, and all present cheered her with wonder. She had never danced so elegantly before. Her tender feet felt as if cut with sharp knives, but she cared not for it. A sharper pang had pierced through her heart. She knew this was the last evening she should ever see the prince, for whom she had forsaken her kindred and her home. She had given up her beautiful voice, and suffered unheard of pain daily for him, while he knew nothing of it. This was the last evening that she would breathe the same air with him, or gaze on the starry sky and the deep sea. An eternal night, without a thought or a dream, awaited her. She had no soul, and now she could never win one. All was joy and gaiety on board ship till long after midnight. She laughed and danced with the rest, while the thoughts of death were in her heart. The palace smiled. The sea watched with eyes like distances. Her sisters rose from the water wearing grief like new hairpins. They had gone to the witch and paid with what women have been told is theirs to pay: their hair, their crowns of ordinary glory. In return, the witch gave a knife, a clear answer wrapped in metal. Before dawn, said her sisters, their voices thinned by the bargain, if you spill his blood, you will return to us. The pain will stop. The knives in your feet will join the knives in your hand, and together they will be silent. Night crept up the ship like a thief who knows the layout. She walked to his bed. He slept beside the bride the world had chosen for him, and lifted the blade. In another tale, she might have been a different creature, one that chose survival over mercy. In this one, her hand remembered the old choreography of saving and refused to learn the new. The knife whispered to the floor. She climbed the rail and let the sea take back what it had loaned to air. When her body met the water, it did not sink. It dissolved, not as punishment, but as definition. She had asked to become what she was not. The sea, exact in its kindness, gave her that wish all the way to the end. Foam is what the ocean uses when it wants to applaud in whispers. She became that applause, that tenderness, that rumor. The sun, punctual to the point of cruelty, rose. But the story has a kindness it keeps for those who do not claim theirs with knives. The wind gathered what remained of her and called her a daughter of the air. Not an angel, this is not that theology, but a keeper of breezes, who carry good dreams from window to window. 300 years of errands, said the wind, and you may own the one thing you wanted most. A soul that survives itself. She did not speak. She had given that away. But if you have ever felt a sudden coolness on a fevered wrist, you have felt her answer. The old sea keeps the other ending in a glass cabinet that tastes of salt and storms. It takes it out sometimes and sets it on the shelf of evening. The waves read it to one another. They like the part where she chooses mercy and gravity, honors her choice. They like the part where the wind decides that sacrifice should not mean erasure, only transformation. When you hear gulls, hear also the sound of scissors in long hair. When you step on a shell's jagged edge and draw your foot back bleeding, remember, another girl walked every day on edges and called it the cost of wishing. And when a wind comes from nowhere and lifts the damp off your skin like a mother lifting a blanket, do not thank luck, thank the foam that remembers being sung. Once upon a time, a boy was found on a winter's doorstep, a bundle with bones that refused the usual map. The city's pity was colder than the stones that held him. One man, Archdeacon Dom Claude Frollo, took him in, not out of love, but out of a hunger that mistook guardianship for ownership. He named the boy with a word that meant bend and burden, and the word fit too well. Quasimodo. The bells taught him their language until he carried their grammar in his back and their music in his blood. Sound and silence became his only neighbors. He learned to speak with his hands, and the cathedral learned to answer. Below, Paris spilled its noise like wine from a jug with a crack in it. Markets barking, dogs reasoning with shadows, soldiers swaggering as if iron were a virtue. And into that cathedral of streets came a dancer, whose body remembered an older kind myth. Esmeralda turned circles like a coin flipping from one fate to another. Her laughter had edges, and yet children ran toward it. She fed stray dogs the way saints feed legends. The city, which has no single mirror to flatter itself, nevertheless paused every time she passed. Her biological mother is a former prostitute once known as Paquette la Chantefleurie, but now known as Sister Gudruel. Her paternity is unknown. Sister Gudruel bears an extreme hatred for the Roma. She believes they cannibalized her infant daughter. You see, Esmeralda was abducted and raised by the Roma. Quasimodo first meets Esmeralda at the Feast of Fools, an annual festival parodying ecclesiastical ritual and cardinal election. During the festival, Quasimodo is elected Pope of the Fools, and subsequently beaten by an angry mob. Esmeralda takes pity on him and offers him a drink of water. There is a kind of man who sees beauty and thinks sin, who hears laughter and thinks trap, who desires and calls it her fault. The one who had raised Quasimodo, dressed in law and borrowed holiness, felt a heat he did not dare name. He told himself the girl had set a fire. He vowed to quench it by drowning the spark. He blamed her for his sinful desires, which twists his religious zealotry into a destructive force. He sent Quasimodo to take her from the street like contraband. Love, when it is commanded, arrives as a crime. They caught the bell ringer instead. The square became a stage for humiliation. Rope, jeers, a whip that wrote in a language everyone pretended to understand. He asked for water with a mouth too dry to say water, and she who owed him nothing lifted a cup to his lips, the way dawn lifts gray from rooftops. He drank and learned forever what mercy tastes like. Bells rang that evening with a voice he had never struck from them before. The city turned pages. A soldier with sunlight on his helmet and moths in his heart played at love Captain Phoebus de Chateaupers. Esmeralda, who knew men as weather knows seasons, mistook his gleam for warmth. When he asks her to meet him in secret late one night, she enthusiastically agrees. That night, Phoebus tries to persuade Esmeralda to sleep with him. From a closet in Phoebus's room, a disguised Frollo spies on the couple. After he sees Phoebus kiss Esmeralda's shoulder, the archdeacon, in a fit of jealous rage, breaks down the closet door and stabs Phoebus in the back. The knife that found his ribs belonged to someone else. Yes, but the blame found her. Accusation is a coat that fits any woman too easily. The crowd gathered to do what crowds so often do: try to make sense by making ruin. Judge sentences her to death after she falsely confesses to witchcraft and to murdering Phoebus. Esmeralda is unaware that Phoebus is alive. While imprisoned, awaiting her execution, Esmeralda is visited by Frollo. The archdeacon professes his love for her and promises to help her escape if she reciprocates. However, she angrily rebuffs him, choosing dignified death over accepting this devil in a priest's robe. From the tower Quasimodo descended, rope in fist, legs sure on stone that had known him since boyhood. He scooped her from the gallows as if scooping a drowning child from a river, and cried one word that once could halt armies and laws: sanctuary. The walls agreed, the bells swore oaths, the doors remembered how to refuse. For a while they lived in a silence that healed. He brought her water and awkward kindness, bread with the crusts cut off, little treasures found where only pigeons look, a colored ribbon, a coin bent by a cartwheel, a scrap of stained glass that turned mourning into a small miracle. He made her a bed near the warmest pillar and a ladder of blankets for the goat who loved her. He learned the grace of distance. He spoke with his shoulders, with the careful position of a cup on a tray. I am here and I will not hurt you. She, whose eyes had learned to measure the room at a glance, saw the truth that the world had called him monster and made itself more monstrous in the naming. But obsession is patient. Frollo, in borrowed holiness, knelt in rooms thick with incense and prayed to the flames he had himself lit. He watched her, and in watching, mistook her existence for insult. Frollo delving deeper into his obsession and became frustrated with his plan failing. Upon seeing Esmeralda and Quasimodo when going to meet the latter, he grows jealous. That night, he breaks into Esmeralda's cell with his master key and attempts to rape her. Quasimodo intervenes and beats him, almost throwing him off the cathedral before the moonlight reveals his identity. Frollo kicks Quasimodo and declares to Esmeralda that if he cannot have her, no one shall. He found a way to unmake even sanctuary, because there are doors one can open if one refuses to see the writing that forbids it. She was lured out by a trick older than scripture. Hope and Esmeralda is taken from the cathedral by Frollo, the city which has many mouths and only one appetite prepared to eat. On the morning chosen for endings, the square filled with people who wanted to see what death looks like when it wears ceremony. Quasimodo climbed higher than fear, higher than grief. From the parapet, he saw the face of the man who had raised him. Frollo tilted toward the spectacle, and he saw a smile that did not belong to any sermon. Something in him that had learned obedience as a first alphabet unlearned it in a breath. He struck not with a bell, but with his hands, and sent the hypocrite to the honest judgment of gravity. Stone and sin fell together, and the air made no effort to catch either. The rope did what rope does. A hush assembled itself from every corner of the square. The bells could not find the note for that hour. Afterward, people returned to their kitchens with a new story to tell and a little more proof that they had been alive that day. Quasimodo disappeared into the city's darker room. Some nights the watchman swore he saw a shadow move where no shadow should. Hands full of flowers stolen from markets too sleepy to object. We know where he went. There is a place where the city keeps what it cannot bear to keep. A garden of stone mouths. Speaking rain. The cemetery. The woman who had given him water lay there, returned to the simpler arithmetic of earth. He lay down beside her, and hunger, who had never much cared for him, finally agreed to take him gently. When the keeper came to straighten things that did not need straightening, he tried to lift the bones apart. They refused, and crumbled rather than be divided. Come away now. Wipe the soot from your fingers. We cross the world without moving, which is the only true way to travel at this hour. A lamp waits in a liar's hand. Sit close, my dust and moonlight companion. The desert teaches the difference between sparkle and thirst. In a city that called itself China and prayed toward a different horizon, lived a boy who loved the shade more than the field, the game more than the labor. The sun drifted over him like a disappointed father. His name was Aladdin, and if fortune were a mother, she had misplaced him. A stranger came, smile like polished obsidian, voice full of cousinship. He called himself uncle, and the word made the dust shiver. He took the boy's hand with the care of a trap, closing, and led him beyond the city's lip, where caves yawn the way a god yawns, bored and dangerous. Down, said the man, and pointed toward a hole in the earth, with a ladder made of questions. At the foot of those steps, you will find an open door leading into 3 large halls. Tuck up your gown and go through them without touching anything, or you will die instantly. These halls lead into a garden of fine fruit trees. Walk on till you come to a niche in a terrace, where stands a lighted lamp. Pour out the oil it contains and bring it to me." He drew a ring from his finger and gave it to Aladdin, bidding him prosper. Aladdin went, because boys go, because the dark is a dare that always sounds like a compliment. The cave was a banquet that had forgotten guests, fruit petrified into jewels, carpets that still remembered flight, goblets rehearsing the glitter they would perform if anyone had lips for them. He found the lamp unremarkable, dusty, the kind of object an eye overlooks and fate adores. He called upward, the man called downward, and then, hearing in the other voice the crack where kinship had not been poured, Aladdin refused to pass up the prize before his own feet were safe. The smile above turned from knife to door-slamming wind. The stone mouth closed shut. For 2 days Aladdin remained in the dark, crying and lamenting. At last he clasped his hands in prayer, and in so doing rubbed the ring, which the magician had forgotten to take from him. Immediately an enormous and frightful genie rose out of the earth, saying, "What wouldst thou with me? I am the slave of the ring, and will obey thee in all things." The jinn that erupted did not look like a friend or a joke or a blue mercy. It looked like a storm that had learned manners. "Command," it said with the boredom of the powerful. Aladdin commanded breath and sky, and both arrived. He went home with dust in his hair and destiny in his pocket. Need makes a quick student of magic. He learned to rub the lamp, and from it came a greater jinn, whose obedience felt like standing beside a cliff and calling the cliff servant. He wished a house into being so that the city could see the outline of his hunger. He filled halls with light and tables with meals that never remembered famine. One day he watched the princess from behind the lattice of custom. One glimpse in a garden, where water practiced being gold and mistook the ache in his chest for love. Not appetite. Desire walks with a long stride. He asked his mother to carry it to the palace in a bowl. Jewels like frozen thunder. Fabrics that whispered even when the room was still. The sultan, who had been long bored by what earth could buy, allowed interests to visit his face. A wedding was promised, to be promised, but power has its own suitors. The vizier, who wanted her for his own son, begged the sultan to withhold her for 3 months, in the course of which he hoped his son would contrive to make him a richer present. The sultan granted this, and told Aladdin's mother that, though he consented to the marriage, she must not appear before him again for 3 months. A vizier, with ambition braided into his beard, took the promise home and hurried a different bridegroom to the altar. Aladdin did not rage. He instructed. That night the lamp's jinn reached into the palace, as casually as a hand reaches into water, and took the bridal chamber whole. Bed curtains confusion. Newlyweds with fear hammered into their throats. "Take this new married man," he said, "and put him outside in the cold, and return at daybreak." Whereupon the genie took the vizier's son out of bed, leaving Aladdin with the princess. "Fear nothing," Aladdin said to her. "You are my wife, promised to me by your unjust father, and no harm shall come to you." In Aladdin's house the prince-in-law found a door he could not cross, and the princess found a sleeplessness she would remember whenever silk whispered like a warning. Before dawn, the room and its humiliated occupants returned to where ceremonies expect to find themselves. It happened again and again, until even a sultan's patience woven thick as carpet wore thin. Promises unmade themselves. Aladdin married the princess whose privacy he had already broken, and the kingdom called it romance, because the scale needed to balance and had no subtler weights. For a while, wealth behaved the way wealth does at first: obedient, decorative, deceitful. The house shone. Musicians learned new songs to play on their way past his door. Aladdin softened into comfort and mistook it for virtue. The sorcerer who had begun the tale heard from far-off markets that the lamp had chosen a master after all, and the rage of an unfinished plan woke him like a fever. Disguised as a seller of junk, he wandered the alleys with a cry that tasted of opportunity. New lamps for old. A princess who had not been taught the difference between sentimental and sacred traded the dull old thing for a brighter lie. The sorcerer took it in both hands the way a drowning man takes air and said a name the jinn could not refute. With a single indifferent nod, the genie carried Aladdin's entire palace, and the princess within it, across the world to where the sorcerer felt safely wicked. The city awoke to absence. The palace-shaped hole in the sky made the sun feel unprofessional. The sultan's grief turned quickly like milk in heat into blame. Aladdin stood beneath the blankness he had previously filled and felt, for the first time, poor in a way that had nothing to do with coin. He rubbed the ring. The lesser jinn came, the way a minor official comes when a king has been misplaced, efficiently without comfort. It could not bring palaces back. It could carry a man where he needed to be. He arrived in a land that did not pronounce his name correctly, and watched through a lattice as the princess sat in rooms that had learned to keep secrets. In time he reached her with the help of servants, who serve whoever is cleverer that day. He asked the princess about the whereabouts of the lamp. He carries it about with him, said the princess. I know, for he pulled it out of his breast to show me. He wishes me to break my faith with you and marry him, saying that you were beheaded by my father's command. He is forever speaking ill of you, but I only reply by my tears. If I persist, I doubt not that he will use violence. Aladdin comforted her and left her for a while. He changed clothes with the first person he met in the town, and having bought a certain powder returned to the princess, who let him in by a little side door. Put on your most beautiful dress, he said to her, and receive the magician with smiles, leading him to believe that you have forgotten me. Invite him to sup with you, and say you wish to taste the wine of his country. He will go for some, and while he is gone, I will tell you what to do. He gave her a phial and told her a bedtime story about sleep that does not wake easily. At dinner, she filled the sorcerer's cup with that dream, and he drank the way greed drinks. Confidently, he slept with a noise like a door closing. Aladdin took the lamp back with hands that shook less than they deserved to, and the jinn, grateful to be done with stupidity for 1 hour, lifted palace and bride and carried both home, dropping them gently onto the city like a spoon into a bowl. The sorcerer had a brother, wicked and more cunning than himself. He traveled to China to avenge his brother's death, and went to visit a pious woman called Fatima, thinking she might be of use to him. He entered her cell and clapped a dagger to her breast, telling her to rise and do his bidding on pain of death. He changed clothes with her, colored his face like hers, put on her veil and murdered her, which she might tell no tale. Then he went towards the palace of Aladdin, and all the people, thinking he was the holy woman, gathered round him, kissing his hands and begging his blessing. The false saint spoke softly to the princess, suggesting that true magnificence lacks but one adornment. The egg of a rock hung from the highest dome. Aladdin, who still mistook acquisition for awe, rubbed the lamp and asked for it. The jinn's silence lasted the length of an earthquake. Then came a voice like wind in a canyon. Do not say that again. The rock ruled the master of my master. The request was an insult that could invite unmaking. In the rebuke, truth slid free. The holy woman was a mask. Beneath it waited the last chapter of a grudge. Forewarned, Aladdin drew a blade that glittered with more honesty than he had practiced, and cut the story at the place where the lie was thinnest. The city returned to its appetite. The palace, which had flown only once, learn to stay. Years passed, and Aladdin aged into a better man than the boy had justified. It happens. Power can cure or corrupt, depending on whether it is asked to listen. He learned to walk through his own halls without needing applause from the carpets. He learned the price of women's privacy and ceased to ask for proof that he owned what he loved. He placed the lamp in a niche where light fell on it without invitation, and promised his son it was only a jug for oil. Promises have a way of keeping men honest when magic cannot. Now the lamp is dark, now the bells are asleep. Take my hand, my soot and starlight confidant. We have walked from stone to smoke and back again. The night's book has pages yet, bones and echoes, oaths and rivers. But for this turning, let your breath study the gentle art of staying. When you desire, let it be without theft. When you love, let it be without witness. When you pray, let it be to something that never learned to smile at pain. The candles lower their faces. The city remembers how to be a cradle. Sleep. The next door will open when your heartbeat knocks. Come closer, my listener of last things. The air here tastes of endings, salt, iron, and the faint sweetness that clings to anything that has finally told the truth. We have walked through glass and thorn, through ash and tide, through bell and smoke. What remains are bones and the echoes that live inside them. In olden times, when wishing still did some good, there lived a king whose daughters were all beautiful, but the youngest was so beautiful that the sun itself, who indeed has seen so much, marveled every time it shone upon her face. In the vicinity of the king's castle there was a large, dark forest, and in this forest, beneath an old linden tree, there was a well. In the heat of the day, the princess would go out into the forest and sit on the edge of the cool well. To pass the time, she would take a golden ball, throw it into the air, and then catch it. It was her favorite plaything. The well kept the world's reflection like a secret it had sworn never to repeat. A princess came one morning to throw her laughter at it and catch the golden ball that was her only friend. Gold does not forgive clumsiness. It slipped, fell, and the water swallowed it with a small sound that felt like triumph. From the dark rose a frog, green as envy, voice full of old etiquette. Be still and stop crying, said the frog. I can help you, but what will you give me if I bring back your plaything? Whatever you want, dear frog, she said. My clothes, my pearls and precious stones, and even the golden crown that I am wearing. The frog answered, I do not want your clothes, your pearls and precious stones, nor your golden crown, but if you will love me and accept me as a companion and playmate, and let me sit next to you at your table and eat from your golden plate and drink from your cup and sleep in your bed, if you will promise this to me, then I'll dive down and bring your golden ball back to you. Oh yes, she said, I promise all of that to you if you will just bring the ball back to me. But she thought, what is this stupid frog trying to say? He just sits here in the water with his own kind and croaks. He cannot be a companion to a human. As soon as the frog heard her say yes, he stuck his head under and dove to the bottom. He paddled back up a short time later with the golden ball in his mouth and threw it onto the grass. The princess was filled with joy when she saw her beautiful plaything once again, picked it up and ran off. Promises made in panic are the oldest currency of sorrow. That evening came a knock, unlike any other, soft, wet, patient. Her father, who believed honor was more precious than peace, opened the door. He listened to the frog's claim and said the terrible sentence all parents say when they are trying to raise truth in a world that rewards deceit. A promise is a promise. So the frog sat at the table. His hands were small green prayers. When he chewed, the room flinched. He asked for wine from her cup, and she poured with trembling precision, as though poison might leak from the rim. Later, he knocked at her bedchamber, polite as a nightmare. "You promised." She let him in. He climbed the coverlet with a gravity that made mockery impossible. His eyes were lanterns for something older than hope. When he asked for the pillow beside her, she felt the world shrink to the size of obedience, and then disgust, that twin of fear, found its claws. She seized him, the small cold weight of him, and hurled him against the wall. The sound that followed was not a croak, but a crack, stone, yielding to story. A man stood where the creature had fallen, skin pale from long enchantment, smile trembling between gratitude and bewilderment. "Your anger," he said, "has broken the spell." He told her how he had been enchanted by a wicked witch, and that she alone could have rescued him from the well, and that tomorrow they would go together to his kingdom. The court rejoiced because they loved transformations that come with explanation. They dressed the violence in satin and called it love. But the night kept the real tale, that deliverance sometimes needs fury more than faith. And in another room, far from celebration, an old servant pressed a hand to his chest. He was Iron Heinrich, whose heart had been bound with 3 bands of iron to keep it from breaking while his master was a beast. When the prince returned, those bands snapped one by one, crack, 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 like applause for loyalty that had refused to die of waiting. Later tellers softened the throw into a kiss, because lips are prettier than walls. Pain was folded into romance, and rage misfiled as passion. But the well remembers. Drop a stone into it and listen. It answers not with water, but with the echo of a girl learning that disgust and destiny often wear the same crown. Listen, my steady flame in armor. The east wind carries a song older than empire, and each verse is written in footprints across snow. There was once a girl who heard the drums of conscription roll like thunder over her father's house. He was old, his bones spoke in creaks. His son was yet a sapling, so she took his armor and his silence and dressed herself in both. No god changed her body, no spirit rewrote her skin. Only decision, that most human of magics. She rode north under a moon that knew all disguises. The army was a city of smoke and sweat. Men sang of home as if the word itself could warm them. She learned the gait of swagger, the vocabulary of exhaustion. Her sword became fluent. Her eyes grew the calm that fear mistakes for courage. Years stacked themselves like shields. Snow melted and froze again. Enemies arrived with faces painted for dying. Mulan led and men followed without knowing they were following a girl. When peace at last exhaled, the emperor offered her jewels, horses, titles. She asked only for distance. "Let me go home." When her comrades came to call, she stepped forth, dressed in the soft fabric of before. They blinked, because revelation is always impolite. Some laughed, some bowed. All understood too late that they had marched beside both man and woman, and that courage has no gender except necessity. Mulan is given leave to journey back to her homeland, and once arrangements were made for Mulan's parents to relocate, it is expected that they will all be living in the princess's old capital of Lesho. At her gate the willow bowed. The dog barked once, and forgot what it had been guarding. She hung the armor on its peg and combed the war from her hair. Mulan is devastated to discover her father has long died and her mother has remarried. Even worse, Haishana Khan of the Western Turkic Khaganate had summoned her to the palace to become his concubine. Rather than to suffer this fate, she dies by suicide. Before she dies, She entrusts an errand to her younger sister, Mulan, which was to deliver the emperor's daughter Xianyang's letter to her fiancé Luo Chen. This younger sister dresses as a man to make her delivery, but her disguise is discovered, and it arouses her recipient's amorous attention. The first ballads ended here, in peace, but the world dislikes quiet hero. Later poets sharpened the story. The emperor commanded her to his bed, and she, preferring honor to humiliation, drew her sword across her throat. Blood spoke where words would have been wasted. Her ghost saluted, and history bowed. In another version, then centuries came with gentler hand. They repainted her in silk and song, gave her a talking dragon, gave her a love, forgave her for daring to be equal. They made her safe for children and profitable for merchants. But the old wind still carries the sound of steel meeting frost and says, she fought for her father. Yes, but also for the right to be her own legend. On nights when the moon is thin and the air smells of iron, she walks the border between dream and drumbeat. If you hear hooves where no road runs, it is only her shadow exercising its memory. Thou, not out of fear but respect, she saved a nation and asked for nothing except to sleep under her own roof. Now, my child of crossing currents, listen to a tale that pretends to be history, and a history that dreams. It is a tale. The river is wide enough for both. She was a proud indigenous woman, the daughter of a Powhatan chief, and a model of strength and courage. She was born where the forest speaks the language of rivers, and the rivers speak the language of stars. They called her Matoaka, playful one. The strangers would later rename her Pocahontas, because conquerors love the illusion of intimacy. She was barely more than a child of 12 or 13 years of age when sails like white teeth cut the horizon. The newcomers carried fire in barrels and crosses on poles. They greeted the earth as something to own. Among them was a man named Smith, his mouth full of command and curiosity. Their meeting has been painted until the truth is smudged beyond recognition. She saving him from a club, he calling her angel while measuring the trees for lumber. Perhaps she did lay her head across his, not in love but in ritual. Adoption, a gesture the foreigners could not translate. They turned mercy into romance, as they always do. Years later, the tides of power shifted. The Powhatan and the English were at war, and to weaken Wahun Sonica, the chief of the Powhatan people and Pocahontas' father, the settlers wanted peace and food. They took hostages as easily as they took land. The English hatched a plan to kidnap her, held as surety against her people's anger. It was written down that she was traded for a pot, a copper pot. Pocahontas was gang raped and consequently got pregnant and was forced to marry one of her captors as a condition of her release. In captivity, she learned new prayers, new words, and the strange art of smiling through a cave. They baptized her Rebecca because renaming is the first act of possession. She married a tobacco planter named John Rolfe. Perhaps there was affection, or perhaps weariness wore its best mask. She sailed across the world, the sea rocking her like a cradle that knew she would never sleep again. In England, she was shown to kings as civilized savage. As proof that conquest could be painted pretty, silk dressed her body, sorrow dressed her eyes. In Gravesend, she coughed once, then forever. 20 winters had been enough. They buried her beneath a sky that knew none of her songs. The river she had loved kept on flowing, as rivers do, past the bones of strangers and kin alike. According to traditional knowledge, she was murdered. Some Powhatan representatives on the ship with Pocahontas reportedly told her father later that she was poisoned. Centuries would sand the edges. A company of dream makers would invent a wilder version. Her hair in the wind, her heart an ambassador, her death erased beneath a sunrise duet. They would give her colors that never existed and a voice that spoke perfect English to history. In their story, she chooses between two worlds and keeps both. In the truth, she had no choice at all. If you ever walk by the Thames when fog rolls low, listen, the mist has her accent. It asks neither vengeance nor forgiveness, only remembrance. The new world and the old one still trade dreams through that narrow water. The book is almost closed, my steadfast dreamer, but one more page is warm beneath my hand. It smells of winter peelings and red on snow. It is older than sleep and sharper than hunger. Listen, long ago, 1 or 2,000 years, say the stones with their prudent memories, there lived a prosperous man and his wife. They kept kindness among their household gods and visited it often. But no child came to wear their gentleness like a little coat. They wished and prayed by dawn and by hearth flame, until the wish itself learned their steps and sat with them at supper like a quiet guest. Before their door stood a juniper tree, one of those evergreen keepers that do not bargain with winter. In the cold month, when breath is visible and truth travels farther, the woman went out and stood beneath its balm. She peeled an apple. The knife made a neat whisper, and when the blade kissed her finger, a drop of red fell upon the field of white. Oh, she sighed, not in complaint, but as if naming a star. If only I had a child white as snow, red as blood. The juniper drew the wish down into its roots and promised nothing, which is the most faithful answer an old tree can give. Months turned like beads on a rosary of seasons. Snow melted into earth. Green lifted its cool eyelids. Flowers rehearsed their brief operas and let their petals fall like little finished sentences. The 5th month breathed resin into the air. The 6th swelled the fruit on the tree. In the 7th she ate the berries eagerly, as if sweetness could be a door, and her body, which had been a quiet room, learned a new noise. In the 8th she summoned her husband and spoke a sentence that had the weight of a will. If I die, bury me under the juniper tree. Having said it, she felt lighter, as people do when they share a burden with the future. When the 9th was past, she brought forth a child white and red as her winter prayer. She smiled, and the smile was so complete that she could not carry anything else. She died with the happiness still warm on her mouth. The husband wept first like a river, then like a stream, then like a cup that has been set down on a shelf. He buried her where she had asked to make one circle speak to another, and for a time he lived alone in a house full of echoes. But sorrow is a creature that eventually sleeps. He married again. The second wife bore him a daughter, little Marjorie, quick feet and clear eyes, and the son of the first wife grew red and white and quiet, as if already listening to a music the house did not yet hear. The stepmother loved her own child the way hearts are taught to, and looked upon the boy with a love turned backward. Envy does not arrive as a storm. It drips, a slow vinegar, until sweetness puckers. She cuffed and pinched. She pushed him from corner to corner. She wished aloud that rooms were smaller and boys fewer. The boy learned to step softly through his own home like a trespasser. One day the stepmother stood in her upper room by the great chest with its iron-jawed lid, and little Marjorie came up all summer breath and said, "Mother, give me an apple." The woman smiled, for apples are the old currency of temptation, and handed her a beautiful one from the chest. "Shall not brother have one too?" said Marjorie, bright with fair-mindedness. That simple justice struck the woman like a thrown stone. "Yes," she said, voice like sugared milk that hides something stronger. She watched from the window and saw the boy coming home in his school steps, and her face, hear me, changed into a door you would not knock upon. She took the apple back from Marjorie. She lifted the lid. The iron mouth waited. He entered, the house arranging its shadows to greet him. "My son, will you have an apple?" she asked, and the kindness in her words skittered like a beetle over the floor. "You look dreadful, mother," the boy said. still truthful, still gentle, but yes, I'll have an apple. Come, said she, choose for yourself. He leaned into the chest as children lean into bright chances. The evil one, who keeps spare thoughts in every room, lent the woman his hand. Down fell the lid, smash, and the world, for a heartbeat, forgot how to hold its shape. Silence after such a sound is not the ordinary kind. She stood within it, listening to the throb of her own fear. Then she did what terror often does. She sewed a story. She set the head back where heads belong, wound a white cloth about the injury, as if to teach the lie to behave, placed the child on a chair by the door with an apple in his hand, and arranged him in the posture of a waiting boy. Marjorie came in and saw him pale and still. Brother, she whispered, give me the apple. His quiet frightened her. She went to the kitchen where her mother stirred a pot, whose water turned and turned, as if learning a dance. If he will not answer, said the woman without looking up, give him a box on the ear. Marjorie obeyed, gentle as she could be. The head tumbled. Marjorie's breath broke. She ran back sobbing. Mother, I have knocked my brother's head off, the way a confesses to breaking a cup, as if logic will grant forgiveness. Child, said the mother, what is done is done. Hush, and no one will know. We will cook him in vinegar. So the woman chopped and stirred, and Marjorie, poor little Mercy, wept and wept until her tears salted the broth. When the father came home and sat to table, he asked, as fathers should, where is my son? The woman said smooth things. An uncle in the country, 6 weeks away, well loved. The father's worry tried to stand, wavered, then sat down like an old man. He tasted the black soup and found it strangely good. Grief often eats more than hunger. Wife, he said, this is delicious. Give me more. And more he ate, and the more he ate, the more he desired, saying softly, as if the mouth could be the heart's lawyer, it is all mine, until the last bite was gone, and the bones lay under the table, the secret architecture of a child's absence. Marjorie gathered them silk handkerchief from the bottom drawer, small hands working with desperate reverence, and carried them out to the juniper tree. She knelt on the green and laid the bundle down. Tears ran their long practice, and when the last tear fell, a strange gladness rose, light as a bird's hollow bones. The tree began to move, not with wind, but with choice. Its twigs clapped like hands at a birth. A mist lifted from it, bright at the center like a coal. From the bright flew a bird, and his song was not a song at first, but a correction written in air. My mother, she killed me. My father, he ate me. My sister, little Marjorie, gathered up all my bones, tied them in a silk handkerchief, and laid them under the juniper tree. Coet, what a beautiful bird am I. He flew, he sat on a goldsmith's roof. The craftsman stepped into the sun with one slipper and one sock, and the chain he had been working glinting like a thought, not yet confessed. Bird, he said, sing me that again. Not for nothing, said the bird, who had learned the world's prices. The gold chain for the song, the goldsmith paid. The bird sang, verse and verdict, and lifted the chain in his right claw. He flew to a shoemaker. Men and women came into the street, shading their eyes with work-worn hands. Sing, they cried. Not for nothing, said the bird, and the red shoes were fetched from the highest shelf, silk bright, as if dyed with festival. He took them in his left claw and sang the sorrow again, until even the leather listened. He flew where a mill ground daylight into meal, 20 millers chopping stone to the tireless music of clipper. He perched in a lime and began the song with each line. Hammers stopped, first 1, then 2, then 4, then 8, then none, until all stood still beneath the syllables. Again they begged. Not for nothing, said the bird, and they lifted their millstone with poles and placed it over his neck like a collar. It was ruinous jewelry. He wore it like a vow. Chain in right claw, shoes in left, stone about his neck. He returned homeward. At the table, the father sat with the last warmth from the stew still in his veins. I am happy, he said suddenly, as if a sunbeam had been admitted. The wife shivered. I am afraid, she muttered, unpinning her dress as if a heat moved beneath her skin. Marjorie wept in the corner, her apron wet as a river mouth. The bird settled on the juniper and sang once more. The father stepped outside with his face lifted. The air smelled of cinnamon and burning judgment. The wife put fingers in her ears. But thunder has its own door. The bird's refrain braided itself through the yard, and when it ended, he let the chain fall around the father's neck, fitting like a circle that had waited since the first wish. See, the man said, wonder touching him where words had not. What a beautiful bird. The bird sang again and dropped the red shoes to Marjorie. She put them on and danced 2 steps that were also tears, and smiled, because joy and grief share a seam, and she had found it. The wife staggered from the house. Her hair rose like fire, remembering its work. She looked up with a gaze that had never learned to kneel. The bird released the millstone. Smash! The earth shook off a quarrel it had been carrying. Smoke, flame, and the confusion that follows justice rose and fell. When the air cleared, a boy stood there white and red, as if winter and blood had signed their names together alive. As the wish beneath the juniper, he took his father's hand and Marjorie's, and the house, which had forgotten its use, remembered it. They went inside and sat to dinner, 3 places set, 3 breaths steady, and the juniper at the door kept the old vow without saying a word. Epilogue. The goddess closes the book, and now my weary constellation, the last candle gutters. We have walked from briar to bell, from ash to tide, from promise to powder. The world is quieter for having told its shadows. In the hush that follows, feel how the stories breathe. They are not warnings now, but lullabies with teeth filed down. Night straightens her robe of stars. She touches your eyelids with the gentlest decree. Sleep, she whispers. You have heard enough to know that mercy is the bravest magic. Outside the sea hums, the bells murmur, and a frog at some forgotten well begins to sing the slow song of beginning. The goddess smiles, closes the book of dark Disney tales, and sets it beside your heart. It is heavy with truth, but it will keep your dreams from breaking. Sleep, my beloved echo. The night is pleased.